Thank you, Alexandra, and hello to everybody. I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, and I'm really delighted to be joining you today in this, I think, a historic conversation. I first would like to thank the organizers, Plan Institute, for this invitation, and I want to acknowledge the leadership of Alamansky, Minister Cultro, and the members of the COVID Advisory Committee who have really worked hard to help put this item on the agenda. I also would like to acknowledge many of my colleagues who are on the line today who have worked for years on this issue, and all the members of the disability community who have been working as well to try to ensure that we address the issue of the disproportionately high rates of poverty among people with disabilities. It's unacceptable, and thank you for all the work that you have done over the years, and in some cases, the decades. I'd like to just acknowledge too, Evelyn Forget, your work has been a landmark in Canada, and I'm quite honored to be presenting with you today, and you raised so many important questions. I'd like to address some of them very briefly and raise a few issues as well. But before I do that, I wanted to say my remarks are really prefaced on the rights and the values and the principles as expressed in the UN Convention on the Rights
exprimé dans la Convention des Nations.
And I'm mentioning this explicitly because I think that all our work has to be framed within the context of the convention and that act. And I hope that those rights and values serve as guideposts for all our work. Let's keep checking back against those guideposts to make sure that we're on the right track all the time. I was intrigued, I was delighted by the throne speech announcement, but I was intrigued as well because the government mentioned that it was interested in introducing a disability income benefit modeled on the guaranteed income supplement. I was delighted to see it because 10 years ago, my colleagues at Caledon and I wrote a report on this very subject. It was authored by Michael Mendelsohn, Ken Battle, Ernie Lightman, and myself. We did that work in 2010 on behalf of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities and the Canadian Association for Community Living. And basically, we were proposing a basic income program modeled on the guaranteed income supplement. So I'm really excited to see that, and I'll talk about some of the dimensions of that and what we meant by that. But I guess I was surprised to see it in the throne speech because throne speeches typically are a vision statement. You know, rarely do you see a sentence in a throne speech where it tells you how the government will actually go ahead and implement something. And I took that as a signal to the disability community that we should think about that program in relation to what we might be developing and proposing. So some of the questions that I have today and my responses to Evelyn's comments as well come in the form of, you know, what can we learn from that guaranteed income supplement? What are some of the lessons that we can apply? And what are some of the barriers and challenges that we face based on, you know, what we know from the history of that particular program? Just very briefly, the Guaranteed Income Supplement was introduced in the country in 1967 as a temporary program. Actually, it's now permanent, but as a temporary program to address the high rates of poverty among seniors in Canada. And I think generally speaking, most people and most studies would agree that it's done a relatively good job in that regard. It could be higher. There's a lot of problems with it, and I'll get into that in a minute. But generally speaking, I think it's well regarded and accepted by the Canadian public. And that, I think, is really important. The one thing it does not purport to do, and I don't believe that it does, is pay for the additional costs associated with aging. So if you have any accommodation needs or housing modifications or vehicle modifications that you need to make, or if you have any medications that you have to take, or if you require technical aids or, you know, any other kinds of assistance or services, that benefit really is not high enough to cover those extra needs. And I think Evelyn makes an excellent point when she warns us to be very careful about the disability support system. I call it system very advisedly because it's a pretty much of a complex morass of programs out there, federal, provincial, private, you know, a tax system, money delivered to individuals. It's a real mix. But what's very important, I think, is that we conceptually make a distinction between what needs can a basic income meet and what needs will it probably not meet. If you have relatively low disability costs, a basic income may meet those needs. But if you have complex needs or higher costs, a basic income really cannot meet all those individualized needs. So let's make sure we work on that associated system, and let's make sure we protect that system as well and improve it. And not assume that because there's a basic income in place, or will be, that all the extra costs of disability will be met through that program, because I think that's an unrealistic expectation. Those are additional needs over and above a basic income. I think another lesson too from the guaranteed income supplement is that it is part of a larger retirement income system. And that system is composed of a number of different programs, each of which is administered and financed in a different way. And they're all supposed to work together in this system, like, cogs in a wheel. And I think what's an important message for us is maybe the government is signaling that it plans to keep some of the disability income programs in place, and this will be an additional piece that will be there to ensure that everybody in the country has a basic or a decent or adequate income. And so I think our challenge as a community is to look at the programs that are part of the disability income system and then ask, do we need to keep this? What is its purpose? How will it interface with this new benefit? And we should have a conversation about each and every one of those programs. For example, Canada Pension Plan disability benefit. Will we keep that within the Canada Pension Plan system? It's an insurance. It's a different kind of program. Will we, incorporate it or not? One of the programs that our paper in 2010 called for was rolling in the long-term social assistance programs for people with disabilities at the provincial and territorial level. That's one program that we very much would like to see rolled into a basic income. I won't go now into all the problems with those programs. You know them very well in terms of adequacy and dignity and rules and complexities and all the problems. We don't want to see that as our basic income system in Canada right now. And some of you may have read the work of John Stapleton, who talks about, the welfareization of disability. That's totally inappropriate. So if there's any program that can be rolled over into basic income, it would be terrific to have that provincial and territorial long-term welfare programs coming into that. That may take some time. It won't happen overnight. At Caledon, we had worked on the development of the Canada Child Benefit, and that evolved over many, many years and went through several iterations. So it won't happen overnight, but let's keep that in mind as a goal. I think it's important to work toward that as a goal. The disability tax credit, that is intended to offset disability-related costs. So let's not be too quick to roll that into an income program unless we're sure we can replace that in some way. And what about the bond and the grant components of the RDSP? Let's think about that too and what will happen. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. It doesn't mean we can't proceed. What it means, I think, is that we start building a base that we can modify over time. Lesson 3, I think the guaranteed income supplement is seen, it basically is seen as an adequate benefit, but only when taken into account with the old age security benefit. Together, those payments comprise about $19,000 a year. It's not a lot. And it probably should be much higher. If we went to a CERB benefit, it would be at the level of 24,000, which would be, far better than 19. Let's not forget, though, that the CERB benefit will be taxed. The guaranteed income supplement is not a benefit that is taxed because it's an income tested benefit, as Evelyn mentioned. So we always have to take into account the after-tax value and make sure that is adequate. The other aspect about adequacy, or the adequate base, and we really need to talk about what that should be in Canada. Should it be higher than the OAS and guaranteed income supplement combination? If so, what should it be? But we also have to take into account indexation. That's a very important part of adequacy. And welfare benefits are not indexed. It means that they lose their value every year in relation to the cost of living. This new benefit must be indexed. Guaranteed income supplement is indexed quarterly, every 3 months. And so those are important features. Adequacy in terms of level, adequacy in terms of indexation, and not taxable. Lesson number 4, I think, relates to the problems that we've seen in the guaranteed income supplement. For the most part, I think people look positively at this program, but if you read any material about it, the main concern that has always come out with respect to this program is the disincentive effects, the disincentives that are built in through, the technical term is very high tax back rates. By the way, I'm going to be working on a paper, a primer with some of the basic concepts and basic terms. It will be ready in just a few weeks. And I'm doing this for IRIS, the Institute for Research and Development on Inclusion and Society. So I won't go today into any of the technical terms. I hope to get that out to the community so that we can all participate in this conversation. But what I think is important is that the guaranteed income supplement has really serious disincentives built into its design, both with respect to work and savings. And if we're going to be true to the principles of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, we should be looking at encouraging and enabling participation in society from all aspects, and not building in programs that penalize this kind of activity. Now, the federal government did in its 2019 budget ease up on those tax back rates and ease up on those penalties a little bit, but they're still built in there. And I think that will be an important consideration of the design. So let's look out for that we're not penalizing people as a result of this particular program. The last, the last lesson that I wanted to speak to you about, and it's I think probably the most difficult one that we'll face, and Evelyn raised it, and it has to do with eligibility. The guaranteed income supplement is fairly straightforward. It's age, it's your level of income. It does not require any workforce participation. You may have worked in the past, or you may not have worked in the past, or you may still be working. That's irrelevant. What is important is you have to be over 65, and your level of income has to be below a certain level. Now, in terms of the disability income benefit, perhaps we'll say, this will be available to people between the ages of 18 and 64. We need to talk about that, because typically in Canada, anybody over the age of 65 automatically goes onto the retirement income system. So do we want to make this available to people over 65? Quebec is considering that in its own basic income program. So it's a question that we have. Certainly, we don't want to see workforce requirements. This should be open to anybody, whether you've worked a lot or not at all or sporadically. This benefit should be available to anybody in Canada. I think the most challenging aspect will be the question of disability and how do we define disability. I would hope that we'd have a benefit that's as open as possible. My fear is that we will be asked to put in some restrictions and constraints in terms of eligibility, and we saw that with the COVID disability benefit. I would say we really need to work hard on that particular aspect. At the very least, we should be looking at the COVID eligibility criteria as the starting point, at the very least. Ideally, we would bring in people who are currently on provincial and territorial social assistance. I would hope that they would be included. And I would hope at the same time that those provinces do not, as Evelyn was saying, lower their benefits and people are left worse off. We have to have an agreement to ensure that people are better off at the end of the day. But I would like to see that definition opened up more broadly so that we can figure out a social definition of disability. The closest that we have in the country right now to a social definition of disability, believe it or not, is the disability tax credit. And you all know how difficult that one is, how many problems we have with that, what a concern there is with respect to mental functions and people with fluctuating conditions. And I can go on and on with the concerns that have been raised. So it's really difficult. We're trying to fix that one, but I think that's one of the major challenges that we face. That said, this is very exciting. We have a model program that has been able to address poverty quite effectively among seniors. So we can say, let's try to do something very significant right now in terms of poverty among people with disabilities. And also let's use this as a foundation, as a building block for a bigger reconstruction of income security as we move along. We can actually do a far better job than we're doing right now. And this is a wonderful opportunity. So thank you very much for allowing me to share some of my thoughts on this today.